We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
What a rather dramatic moment. In the Sun debate, something happened. It stopped the show. Liz Truss looked very shocked and walked forward. We'll show you the clip of that in just a moment. We'll also talk about what's been discussed last night and today. All of that coming up in a moment. Before that, the news.
Nigel, thank you. I am Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. The latest Conservative leadership debate between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss has come to a sudden end after what is being described as a medical incident in the studio. Well, GB News' political correspondent Tom Harwood joins us live now from central London in the spin room. Tom, what more can you tell us about what's happened?
Yes, it was an incredibly dramatic moment. Around halfway through the debate, a sudden crash. We saw Liz Truss, who was speaking at the time, look incredibly shocked, walk forward, it appeared, to help whatever had gone on. Afterwards, we had learned that the host of the debate, Kate McCann, unfortunately fainted in what was described as a medical incident at the time. Fortunately, it appears now that Kate McCann is okay, but the debate has not restarted. Instead, the candidates spoke to the studio audience there in person, and that is the end of the debate. I have to say, in the spin room here, everyone went very, very quiet. There was a look of shock on the faces of those who were supporting both camps, and everyone just wishing that everyone was okay. It does mean that there is going to be no spin after this debate. We're not going to be talking to the political heavyweights in this room tonight, and we're just wishing that everyone has a very speedy recovery.
Tom, thanks very much for that update, and of course we'll keep you updated with everything that's happening there from central London throughout the evening. Other news, the International Monetary Fund is predicting the UK is set to have the weakest economy in the G7 next year. They expect Britain's economic growth to expand by just 0.5% due to rampant inflation, which would be the worst performance among all major economies except for Russia. It comes as the IMF warned that stalling growth across the world means we could be teetering on the edge of a global recession. People in England are being urged to use water wisely as the country faces drought in August. The Environment Agency is warning the dry conditions have been exacerbated by record high temperatures and lower than normal rainfall so far this year. Most of England has moved into prolonged dry weather status, and the group is now taking precautionary measures to mitigate the impacts. And Network Rail is advising people not to travel by train tomorrow unless absolutely necessary, due to another day of strikes. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators will walk out in a long-running dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Network Rail says only 20% of services will run, and some places will have no trains at all. To minimise disruption, it's published a special timetable showing many trains will start later and finish earlier. Well, Foreign Secretary and Tory leadership candidate Liz Truss says she doesn't support the action.
I would legislate to make sure there are essential services on our railway. It is completely wrong that the travelling public are being held ransom by militant unions. We can't allow that to happen. We need to make sure our essential services run.
On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now, let's get back to Nigel.
Well, the ballot papers go out to Conservative members next week, so these debates that are happening now are really very, very important. We had the full BBC debate last night, and I'll tell you what wasn't discussed, even more than talk about what was discussed. But tonight's debate, which was on from 6 till 7, or supposed to be, sponsored by the Sun newspaper, ended quite dramatically. There were conversations going on, understandably, about tax, about the National Health Service, about the cost of living, and then this happened.
He's not going to stop there. He's going to challenge the freedom and democracy.
OK, so you saw Liz Truss's face there. There was a noise. You saw Liz Truss's shock, horror, and then she started to walk forward. Pretty clear to me from the moment it happened that she was going to help somebody. We didn't quite know what happened, but it appears that the host of the show, Kate McCann, the host of the programme, had collapsed. We're told from News UK sources that she is OK. But it's a pretty dramatic thing to happen in the middle of a big debate. And let's cross over to Tom Harwood, who is over there right now. Tom.
Yes, it was an incredibly dramatic moment, Nigel. I have to say here in the spin room, not where the debate is being recorded, but the spin room, a separate location in central London, where the big, heavy-hitting supporters of both teams are here preparing, or were preparing, I should say, to spin that their candidate had done best after the fact. The room went completely silent when that happened. People looked very, very shocked. Everyone clearly had a lot of concern for what had gone on in that room, and it began to become established that the host of the debate, Kate McCann, had fainted. Thankfully, we have established that she is OK now, but a really tense moment there, and it does mean that the debate was concluded about half an hour early. It was not then picked up. The candidates then went to speak to the in-studio audience rather than continuing anything on air, and it also means that the heavy-hitting MPs here in the spin room tonight to support their candidates in this race will not be speaking to the media, that the spin, the usual post-debate spin, will not take place this evening, and everyone here is just wishing that everyone over in the studio is OK.
Well, Tom, of course, that absolutely goes without saying. We all wish Kate McCann well, and we're pleased to hear the news sounds good. And it's a rotten, absolutely rotten thing to happen at any time, let alone when you're in the middle of a high-profile debate like that. In terms, Tom, of what was discussed, and, you know, whatever's happened tonight, these ballot papers are going out in a few days' time. Did you have any impression? Was Sunak going more gently tonight after his bull in a china shop approach yesterday?
Yes, it really did seem that Rishi Sunak has taken a different tack this evening. Instead of choosing to attack Liz Truss, he instead used his moment to ask Liz Truss a question, to ask her about the fact that it was her birthday today. Clearly a more softly, gently approach from Rishi Sunak today, after the polls yesterday suggested that, at least amongst Conservative supporters, his more aggressive approach last night didn't seem to butter much bread, but also talking to some of the people in and around Rishi Sunak's team here tonight. It seemed like the game plan for the Rishi Sunak campaign was to let Liz Truss speak more and interrupt less. That seemed to be how things were going through the first half of this debate, and we did get to some substantial issues there. Rishi Sunak really talking up his support for the NHS, saying he came from a medical family, that he instituted the national insurance tax rise in order to help protect the NHS. Of course, one of the questions came from someone who was suffering from cancer at this time and felt like the NHS hadn't been there for him in the way that it could have been. So a really key differentiation there. Liz Truss, of course, saying that she would find the money, but through general taxation rather than through that tax rise through national insurance that we saw to help the NHS through clearing that backlog crisis. But also a differentiation point where Liz Truss tried to set aside that issue of corporation tax. Instead of describing her corporation tax policy as a corporation tax cut, as it has been described by many in the press, Liz Truss was saying, and she, to be fair, is right on this point, that she is not changing the level of corporation tax. Her proposal is not a cut from the level it is now. It is simply a decision not to raise the level of corporation tax, which Rishi Sunak is planning to do next year. Rishi Sunak planning to raise corporation tax from 19 to 25%, in line with countries like France, and about 10 points above countries like Ireland. Liz Truss saying that would be the wrong move and that she wants to keep taxes down. Similarly, when we got onto those issues of the cost of living, Liz Truss continually moving the issue back to taxation.
Yeah, no, I have to say that one particular point that she's not going to cut taxes, she's just not going to put corporation tax up, is a strong point. Tom, thank you. Any more breaking news, please come straight back to us. Now, what amazed me last night was our state broadcaster, who we all have to pay 160 quid a year to, hosted a debate, and guess what? Guess what? They were in Stoke-on-Trent. There they were, deep in the red wall, where the number 2 concern of voters, just beneath that of the cost of living, is the migrant crisis, what is happening in the English Channel, and the absolute loss of control of our borders. And yet, the BBC deigned not to even raise it as a question. Now, I don't think either Truss or Sunak would have had much of an answer, but the fact that it wasn't even debated was astonishing, nor was law and order. When you look at the crime statistics, we need a serious conversation there too. I know a fair bit about head-to-head debates. I did 2 against Nick Clegg when he was Deputy Prime Minister back in 2014. And you can have a game plan going in as to how you're going to play it, but frankly, once the bell goes, whatever happens, happens. One thing I've learned about debates is it's not about going in hard. It's not about being on the front of your feet. It's actually about being on your heels and waiting a little bit. And you wait that little bit, wait for the opportunity, and in you go. Now, I saw Nick Clegg go at me like a bull in a china shop, and it did him no good. And that's exactly what we saw with Rishi Sunak yesterday. It did not work. And I think even though Liz Truss is not a great debater, and do you know, at the start of the Sun debate tonight, she was asked to give 60 seconds to speak for 60 seconds to camera. She had to look down 4 times at her notes. So it isn't, I don't think the whole thing is actually a very edifying prospect. I'd like to ask you at home, who do you think is winning this battle? Farage at gbnews.uk. Well, joining me, somebody who has been around all these political figures for some years, is Charlie Rowley. Charlie, you were until last week a special advisor to Michael Gove, and Michael Gove got unceremoniously turfed out of office as a final act of vengeance, I think, from Boris Johnson. But you've been in and around the seat of power for quite a long time. And you're a Conservative, and you want the Conservatives to do well. And, you know, whilst you're not going to take sides, particularly on this, you want them to do well. It's not a very edifying spectacle, the whole thing, is it? I mean, last night they were interrupting each other. They were rude. I thought Sunak's face looked pretty aggressive at times. In fact, it almost reminded me of the first debate between Trump and Biden that took place in 2020. This is not doing the Conservative Party much good, is it?
Well, I think that's right, Nigel, and I think you're absolutely right. Up until last week, I was a special advisor to Michael Gove. In that time, I have to say, I neither felt special or that I gave any kind of advice to Michael, because he was absolutely brilliant at these kinds of debates when they took place, particularly in the chamber. But I think what was telling about last night was the spin room afterwards, because you have the debates, as you say, and you go head to head, and you need to try and differentiate yourself from your opponent. But in the spin room afterwards, what was fascinating is that all sides came together to recognise that whoever wins, whoever becomes the leader of the Conservative Party, whoever goes on to be the Prime Minister of this country, they need to bring the whole party together. And that's exactly what we've all got to do. And they both have particularly different styles, but we all recognise that whoever wins the contest as a Conservative family, we need to come together and win that next election.
You may well do that, because outside of tax, there aren't many differences at all, actually, between these two candidates. They really are very similar on virtually everything else. But it's the wider perception to the public, isn't it? Because actually what's happened here is the Conservative Party has been talking about itself for the last 6 or 8 months, not reaching out to the country, looking divided, looking weak. And let's be frank, I mean, whatever Boris's personal failings on a political platform, political stage, I mean, frankly, he looks a giant against these two.
Well, I think communication is key, and I know by Liz's own admission, she said she's not the slickest of contenders in this race. It's not a
great CV to be Prime Minister, is it?
But I think if you have the policies to deliver what the people of this country want, which is going to beat Labour at the next election, it will be a 5th historic general election victory for the Conservative Party. So you need a candidate that is going to be able to deliver. And you need a candidate that can, we ask a lot of politicians these days, and you will know as a leader of a party, you will have people who disagree with you at times, that want you to go further, faster, or not at all in particular areas. But you have to recognise that if you've got the policies and the communication, and you're able to connect with people, depending on what it is that the people actually demand of the day. So, we have a cost of living crisis, we have an immigration crisis, as you rightly pointed out at the top of the programme. If you've got the policies to deal with that, but you have a team of brilliant ministers who can communicate those messages, then you could be absolutely fine.
Do you actually think this Conservative Party is going to come up with the policies to deal with those issues? Because they look to me like they've been in office for a long time, they're tired, and they're running out of ideas.
Well, I don't agree with that, because I think actually the debates themselves have proved that they are, as you say, we're all talking about the Conservative Party, and new ideas are coming forward. And I think that shows, actually, after 12 years of being in government, that we still are a party that has a breadth of ideas, that is a broad church, that will welcome everybody to the party, because it's only because of our success. It is only successful because we have so many views and people from different sides of the party.
So you think a fifth win's on the cards, do you?
I think everybody will recognise within the Conservative Party and the country that it is only a Conservative government that will tackle the issues that are at stake, and it is always better to have a Conservative government than a Labour one.
Well, I have to say, Charlie Rowley, I love your optimism. I don't agree with it at all. I think they're out of ideas, but I love your optimism, and I thank you for coming on. We learned overnight of the passing of a political figure, Lord David Trimble, and, there are very, very few men in history whose careers have marked a genuine watershed moment, a genuine change. And David Trimble was one of those people. He's seen to be very much the architect of the Belfast Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement. Extraordinary, really, because a couple of years before that, he was at Drumcree. There was a standoff, and he was holding hands with Ian Paisley with an orange sash. And you thought for all the world that the last person that would ever make concessions to Sinn Féin IRA, as they always called them, would be David Trimble. But he did. And it came at one hell of a cost. One hell of a cost from the unionist side towards him, as well as the nationalist side. I have to say, I had grave reservations about much of what was agreed at the time. But he is a truly historic figure. And it was interesting. In his last couple of years, he very much supported the Brexit position and was deeply, deeply critical of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Well, joining me is someone who knew David Burnside for a long, long time. David Burnside, MP, member of the Stormont Assembly, running New Century here in London, doing communications advice. You knew David Trimble for a long time. You yourself, I think it's fair to say, had real problems with that Belfast Agreement when it first came into being.
We all had. The whole of the unionist community had. We had 35 years of being blown to bits. This is 50 years since Bloody Friday. Gerry Adams and his friends, head of the Belfast Brigade, let off 20 bombs. I was in Belfast that day. David Trimble was in Belfast that day. They blew the shit out of Northern Ireland. Civilians, policemen, soldiers. So we were brought up in that atmosphere. So to come to the stage where the same people, Adams and McGuinness, you had to trust them. And that trust had to be built. George Mitchell ran it beautifully, the Senator George Mitchell.
The American senator, yeah.
From the US.
Yeah.
And David, I could see, I signed and supported the agreement with great reluctance. I didn't like prisoners being released, but it wasn't an amnesty. They were released on licence. If they committed crimes again, they went back in.
There were 400, weren't there? 400 from both sides. 400 from both sides.
And the second thing that made me disillusioned after supporting the agreement was the shameful treatment from Chris Patton of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, that it stood between civil war and peace in Northern Ireland, both Protestant and Catholic members of the RUC. So there was a disillusionment within unionism. The Paisley side from the beginning were against it. No, 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 no. Even though they...
In the end,
they took part in every single aspect of it.
Yeah.
So David was very brave in those days.
Yes.
Geoffrey Donaldson, Arlene decided to move off to the DUP. I thought that was wrong. I stayed in the Ulster Unionist Party. But he was very, very brave in doing it. And he was not only under threat from the IRA, as any unionist politician was during the Troubles, he was under threat from the militant side of Paisleyism. You can look at the TV screens now, the night he lost his seat, so did I, in 2005. I mean, he and Daphne were almost driven to the ground as they left the polling station. That was above and that was too far, in my opinion, for behaviour from fellow unionists. So David went through a great deal of tension.
And 25 years on, I mean, the last time I was in Belfast, it felt like a modern British city.
Overall, it's better.
And so
And he was very disillusioned about Northern Ireland being the only part of the UK not getting Brexit. We're on a window ledge. We're half in and half out.
Yes.
That's the problem with the protocol. Because, you know, the basis of the Belfast Agreement was consent, consent, consent. You had to have nationalist Republicans on side. You had to have the Unionists on side. A difficult constitutional position to uphold, but it worked, and it's still there. And even though it has problems, it's dormant.
And Trimble spoke about this and said that basically the protocol was in contravention.
Oh, no, it's in breach of the Act of Union. There's a legal action still going in Belfast. We're not an equal part of the United Kingdom on trade within the nation.
And the leadership debate and the Conservatives, they're both saying they'll do something.
Well, I have more time I'll declare my hand in this one. I have more time for Truss on this one. At least she has declared her position. Richie Sunak and Michael Gove were not sound in the cabinet discussions, I believe, on the subject. They're frightened of having a free trade war with Europe. Here we go again. They should have, you know, if the Tories had taken a firm line on moving out on a no trade deal, would have been in a much better place.
Well, we have a stronger hand. But finally, final thought. David Trimble, historic figure?
Brave, historic. He contributed to peace and he should be thanked.
David Burnside, thank you very much indeed. In a moment, we will talk about the weather. I know they say the English always talk about the weather, but boy, it is dry out there. What's going to happen to our farmers? What's going to happen to food production? Will we all be on standpipes in a few weeks' time?
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Tonight on The Mark Steyn Show. All eyes on the Netherlands as Dutch farmers continue their fight against net zero and a major airport limits the number of flights taking off to fight climate change. Eva Vlaardingerbroek won't be letting those issues slide. The German government admits the COVID booster vaccines have caused health complications for 1 in every 1,667 people. We'll be taking a closer look at their official report with Dr. Claire Craig. And Natalie Winters has uncovered a link between the Wuhan lab and monkeypox. Those stories and more on The Mark Steyn Show tonight at 8 o'clock.
Well, News UK have confirmed that Kate McCann did faint, that she's okay, but it was decided it wouldn't have been a wise thing for her to carry on. That's why the debate ended when it did. But I asked you before that, having seen the BBC debate last night and at least half of the debate today, who is winning the battle for number 10? Brendan says Liz thus far, calm and controlled. Another viewer says it makes no difference. None of them listen to the people or live in the real world. Self-serving, the lot of them. I have to say that view is gaining currency around the country. Stuart says certainly it's not the British people. And Darryl says definitely Liz Truss at present. And I think the truth of it is that she was always favourite with this electorate. 160, 180,000 Conservative members, however many it is, she was always the favourite with them because she's a sort of Mrs Thatcher tribute act, although the unkind people say she's a pound shop, Mrs Thatcher. But the point about the debates thus far is even though she's not a great public debater, even though she can't speak for 60 seconds without referring to her notes several times, she wasn't damaged by Sunak. And therefore, even a score draw would have been a win for Liz Truss, but I think she came out slightly ahead at the moment. And as I say, those ballot papers go out next week. Now, let's have a look at a NASA space map of the United Kingdom taken in July 2021. Let's have a look at this image, and you can see it's England. And then let's have a look at 2022. Right. So you see so that's 21. The country looks green. Let's look at 22 again. And the country is brown. And I have to say, last summer, I couldn't get a single tomato to ripen in July. They literally rotted on the vine in the garden. I should have bought a greenhouse, I know some of you will say. Today, coming into London from Kent, I was quite shocked. I saw ferns that had gone completely brown, and to my astonishment, the trees have started to turn. I just couldn't believe it. Autumn beginning in the middle, or three-quarters of the way through, July. And that's because we have a serious situation. The National Drought Group did meet this morning. What does it all mean? Well, what will it mean for crops? What will it mean for farming? It seems that a hosepipe ban in some way may not be too far away. Well, joining me is Mark Tufnell, President of the Country Landowners Association. And you yourself are an arable farmer. Quite difficult to grow things without water, isn't it?
It's very difficult to grow things without water. From a cereal point of view, the crops are already senescing off. They've grown as much as they can, and so the yield will be down, and I suspect the quality will be. We just simply haven't had enough rain, and if you look at the statistics, we haven't had enough since it goes back to 1975, 1976. So the actual rivers and the water table is way down. But the big impact it's going to have at the moment is for those remaining crops that need that water. So that's vegetables, salad crops, and potatoes. And we need to irrigate those crops very wisely, do it at night so we don't get the evaporation, because we need to fill the shelves with good, high-class British product.
Now, in 76, of course, we had huge restrictions on usage of water. And it nearly happened again, didn't it, in 2018? We were very, very close to a restriction. So a full hosepipe ban could lead to a very limited use of irrigation for agriculture.
It could do if the Environment Agency brought in what's called Section 57. Now, we're arguing that that shouldn't happen because we need that water for our crops to provide the food that we all need. And also the other area that we mustn't forget is because there's no fodder in the fields for the animals, the livestock, a lot of them are being brought in, they're being fed crops and hay and silage that they would normally
that's the winter
fed.
crop, is that?
Exactly.
Yes.
So they're being fed that early. So they've had a first cut silage. We're waiting in some places, particularly in Pembrokeshire, for a second cut, and it hasn't rained, so they'll have to wait. And those animals, if they haven't got anything to eat, they'll be eating the supplies that they would be eating in the winter months.
Are we close to a farming crisis?
Not yet, but we need to preserve the water we have. Now, there is a longer term plan, and it's something that governments have been looking at. And at long last, there is a farming transformation programme which is providing funding towards capturing and keeping that water within small reservoirs. But it takes time. And as you can imagine, there are licensing arrangements and there are planning applications that have to be made. It all takes a lot of time.
Yeah, no, it does.
And we need the water now.
Long-range weather forecast?
Well, the long-range forecast at the moment, according to the Met Office, presented this morning, is that there's not going to be very much rain until the 3rd of August, and at least going forward, and they're forecasting another couple of heat waves. So we're going to need to have wet ground to plant those crops in the autumn to get a good take for all the winter crops, the winter wheat, the winter barley that we all need to sustain not only the UK population, but all the animals that survive on it.
Mark Tufnell, thank you for coming in. We'll be hearing a lot more about this story, I suspect, over the next few weeks. Now, of course, it's a joyous moment tonight, at least we hope it's going to be, because the England women's football team, the Lionesses, well, they are roaring. They're now into the semi-finals of the Euros. They're playing Sweden, and there's a big crowd gathered with a large screen down in Trafalgar Square, and our reporter, Ellie Costello, is there with the crowd right now.
The excitement is building here. The Lionesses are about to face Sweden in the next 30 minutes. It's like a concert atmosphere here. You're going to hear the crowd singing. Just behind us, people with their foam fingers. Loads of people really excited to watch this match very, very shortly. I wanted to bring you these two down here because this is fascinating. This is a couple. One is from Sweden, this lovely lady here, and this gentleman is from England. They're here together, but obviously they're going to be supporting different teams. So I've got to push you. What do you think the result is going to be tonight? We'll go to you first.
I think 1-1 in full time, and then Sweden will win with 2-1.
You're here in the minority supporting Sweden. How are you feeling about that? Maybe you two might be moving a little further apart as the night goes on. And what about you, sir? What do you think the result's going to be?
Same, ditto. I think 2-1 extra time.
Do you? But you think to England, surely?
To England, yeah, obviously, yeah.
Of course, of course. Well, good luck. I hope you're still very much in love by the end of the night. Well, the atmosphere here is absolutely incredible. I'm just going to take you around here. This is the fan zone in Trafalgar Square. We're 200 miles away from where the Lionesses are playing in Sheffield tonight, but it very much feels like it's all happening here. It's a very different atmosphere to what you might see. Very different to what you might see at men's football matches. There's lots of families here, lots of children. You can see people with the foam fingers dancing at the front over there. I would say at this point there's a lot less drinking than you might see at a men's football match. It feels more like a family festival at this point. Really fun and jovial atmosphere. Well, they're certainly hoping that the Lionesses can bring it home tonight for the first time in 66 years. The first major tournament trophy to come home to England. And we're really hoping that tonight is the night, just one step away from that final for the Lionesses.
We certainly are, Ellie. Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. It looks very, very exciting down there. We've all got our fingers crossed. And I say that as somebody who was at the men's final last year, which of course we lost on penalties, which we nearly always do. Now, a couple of what the Farage moments. Yes, isn't it wonderful? The World Health Organization, the Brits have just appointed a new high post position. Yes, to a communist British scientist. You couldn't make this up, could you? Professor Susan Mitchell, been a member of the British Communist Party for 50 years. She was a great apologist for the Soviet Union. She was a member of SAGE, don't ask me why. And she's gone to the WHO to work on the Behavioural Advisory Group. That means people who want to control our every move in life. She will advise how to boost compliance with health policies such as vaccine rollouts. She's an advocate of wearing face masks indoors as well as outdoors, and she believes that social distancing and test and trace should be here to stay permanently. Well, isn't that absolutely wonderful? I'm sure Susan Mitchell and the World Health Organization just about deserve each other. Another what the Farage moment, the French Parliament yesterday voted to abolish the 80-year-old French TV licence. Yes, they pay €140 a year, so very similar in many ways to us, and the French Parliament have voted to abolish it. I know there is a debate in this country about defunding the BBC. Maybe we better take a leaf out of the French book. And finally in this section, a very serious story. Nord Stream 1 is that pipeline that brings in the gas without which Germany cannot heat its homes and cannot run its factories. And it's been under pressure. It was closed recently for maintenance. It's currently pumping out 40% of its total capacity. But it's been announced by Gazprom that it's decreasing capacity to just 20%. And now, in Germany, and you know, regular viewers and listeners of this programme, I've been saying for months that energy rationing is coming to the continent and may come to us. Now, the European Union are telling all their member states they must reduce usage by 15%. German voices today now saying they must reduce by 20%. The evidence thus far is that consumers have reduced usage by 5 to 7%. And I don't know what's going to happen from here, but it could be that Germany is heading for an absolutely catastrophic winter by making themselves too reliant on Russia, closing their nuclear plants, and of course, going back a little bit, closing many of their coal-fired power stations. They didn't think it through. They didn't get it right. Now, in a moment on Talking Pints, I'll be joined by a man who was awarded the MBE for his work to charity, his work with the homeless, his effort to get people off the streets and back to work and getting, their self-respect and pride back in their lives. But he dared, he dared in 2020 to criticise BLM, and he was sacked from his job and found himself at the centre of a national storm. Nick Buckley, MBE, joins me on Talking Pints in just a minute.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
It is time for Talking Pints. I'm joined by Nick Buckley, MBE, Mancunian, who's come to visit us today. Nick, welcome to Talking Pints.
Thank you.
Little secret, Nick was supposed to be here on Talking Pints the day that Boris Johnson resigned, that he came all the way down from Manchester and we sent him back again. But I think, Nick, you did understand the reasons why.
Absolutely.
Now, Nick, it's a fascinating tale. You know, you worked for the local council up in Manchester, and in the end you went out on your own, set up your own charity called the Mancunian Way, which was quite an inspired title, actually. But you spent sort of 20 odd years working with homeless people, working with those who were or are vulnerable. What are the big lessons you learned in those 20 years?
The lesson really was about personal responsibility. So most of that time was working with young people, trying to stop them getting involved in crime, and then I later got into homelessness as well. And it was the same lesson. It was personal responsibility. And I was guilty of this through my teens and 20s, of always waiting for someone to improve my life for me. And shock, horror, no one's ever going to improve your life for you. You have to do it yourself. So, you know, the people who end up on the street, rough sleeping, they're broken people anyway, and they've got a lifetime of the state, social services, the courts making decisions for them. And eventually it turns into something called learned helplessness, where you don't know how to solve your own little problems. You're just helpless, always waiting for someone to fix them for you.
And I imagine a lot of people who are sleeping on the streets as a result of everything have psychological problems.
Yes.
There are many with alcohol and substance addiction problems. How the hell do you turn those lives around? Can they be turned around in significant numbers?
Every life can be turned around. I'm never having anyone telling me that we have lost causes, because we don't have lost causes.
Do you really believe that?
No, I honestly believe that. Some people will take a hell of a lot of work, and in the charity I used to be part of and run, we had a policy called No More Last Chances, which means we never run out of chances with you. We'll spend 6 months helping you, getting you off the streets, getting you into a job, getting you into drug treatment, and after 8 months you fall back on the streets. Well, do you know what? We'll start again from square one.
Really?
Because it may take you 2 or 3 times before it sticks. So it's all about making, because these are our fellow citizens, and I've never been in a position where I want to write off our fellow citizens. But it's difficult work.
But you can't help those, Nick, surely, that don't want to be helped.
They all want to be helped. what happens is you walk up to someone on the street who's sat there begging, living on the streets, and you say, do you want some help? And they go, no, thank you, I'm fine. Well, we know that's not true. You can tell by their eyes. Their eyes are telling you, I'm dying, I'm in pain, I'm sorry I was born. That's what their eyes are telling you. And you need to build up a relationship with that person over weeks and months, and you start unpicking, why are you here? You know, what is it that happened in your life that led to this? What can we do to help? And these people need professional help. They don't need people, you know, I don't fix people's lives on the streets. All I do is get them the professional help they need.
You're the broker,
I'm the broker, yeah, because they need professional help. You know, it's the people who go around buying people meal deals. Honestly, if a sandwich could get someone off the streets, we wouldn't have a problem in this country. They need professional help, not a sandwich, and not 17 pence in change. That wouldn't fix anyone's life.
So when we're walking down, it could be Victoria Street or somewhere in London or anywhere in Manchester equally, and when there are people there asking for money on the street, should we give them money? Or how do we know we're not being exploited by criminal gangs? Or you know, what should we do?
So 15 years of working with the homeless, this is what I say. You never give anyone money on the streets.
Okay.
Because from my evaluation of Manchester City Centre a couple of years ago, 65% of the people begging on the streets of Manchester City Centre were not even homeless. That's 2/3.
Really?
Even the 1/3 who were living on the streets, giving them money doesn't help them at all. It goes straight into the local drug dealer's pocket for some more drugs. Those drugs slightly damage that individual a little bit more. Wow. So now it's harder to get off the streets. There's a bit more damage. So what does he need? He now needs a little bit more drugs because he's slightly more damage. We're paying people.
So this is a real tough love approach you're advocating here.
Everything we do is tough love.
Very, very.
And then people say, well, I don't give money, I give sandwiches. And surely that can't hurt anybody. But the answer is, yes, it does. And let me explain why. Because in all our major cities, we have homeless centres where people can go and get food and have a shower and things like that. It's only when they're in those centres having a hot meal, sat at a table like a human being, not sat on a dirty pavement eating scraps. They feel human sat at a table using a knife and fork. That's when the social workers and support workers can start talking to them and start unpicking some of their problems. So when you give someone a meal deal sat on the street, all you've done is stop them getting help that day. Because now they don't need to go to the centre.
This is an incredibly powerful message. There'll be a lot of people watching this thinking, crikey, you know, I have given money, I have done things, and you're telling them, with all your experience, that doesn't help.
It doesn't help, but I want them to help. So what? I'm not saying don't help these people. No, they need help.
It's the right kind of help.
And you should want to help. The way you help them is you do some research, you find out some local charities in your area who are doing face-to-face work. Not the big ones, the small charities doing face-to-face work. And you set up a direct debit to give them £4 a month. That means something. That does something for those people. That's how you help.
Did you find with the Mancunian way that fundraising was a big challenge?
It got easier and easier before COVID because we got better and better at it.
Yes.
Then since COVID, it's all collapsed. And then I got into trouble myself.
We're going to come to that, don't worry.
so now the funding through donations is very minimal now.
Can you think back through the years of, you know, big success stories, people whose lives you turned completely around, who went to work and became successful?
Oh, absolutely. I'll tell you a quick one or two. So we got one homeless gentleman, our job on the building site as a labourer. We phoned up his employer the first couple of days. How's he doing? He's doing great. The second week we phoned up, how's he doing? He's been late every morning this week. So we went down to see him at lunchtime. What's going on? You know, this is a great opportunity. But I'm really, really sorry. I'm going to try harder. I'll wake up earlier in the morning. We went, what do you mean? He went, I've actually got no money till I get paid in 3 weeks' time. The job centre stopped all my money. I'm walking 7 miles to get to work in the morning. I've got no money for food, and I'm walking 7 miles home every evening. And I'm sorry I was 15 minutes late. I went, don't apologise. Here's a month's ticket for you, for the buses.
Yeah.
We'll get you some food from a food parcel. So here's a man who was going to get sacked, who would have failed again in life, not because he was lazy, not because of a drug addiction, because he had no money to get a bus ticket, a £1.50 bus ticket, and we were going to ruin his life again. These are little things, the little problems that we need to solve to make sure people are successful, instead of saying, just a waste of space.
Well, it's a very compelling story. And for your work, you were awarded the MBE, which is a great honour, and congratulations on that. And it was all looking pretty good, really, wasn't it? Everything was going well in life, Nick. And then the madness which struck. And, of course, I was a victim of the madness too. And I'm talking about within 24 hours of the murder, as a court decided, of a man in the Midwest, George Floyd. Within 24 hours, there were organised protests in London. I mean, this wasn't a coincidence. This was planned. But BLM mania hit the corporate world, the media world. You couldn't say a word against it. All I did was try to explain that BLM was an avowedly Marxist, dangerous left-wing organisation that wanted to defund the very police who were taking the knee to them. But you went a bit further in a way, didn't you?
I was naive. People say I was brave. I wasn't brave. I was naive. We had the mostly peaceful riots in London. And I thought, who are these Black Lives Matter organisation? I'd heard of them before, but I didn't really know much about it. So I Googled it, found their website. So not a conspiracy theory website, their website. Read their website and went, I don't like the sound of any of this. Especially the bit about the breaking down the Western nuclear family. And I thought, that's the biggest problem we've got in our society, is no fathers in the home, and they want to do more of this. So I wrote a 700-word blog as an individual and put it on my personal blog. Didn't talk about the charity at all because it's nothing to do with the charity. Put it out there. Some people went crazy. So I went from an MBE to a Nazi in 6 months. So somebody said...
I'm sorry to laugh. But,
no.
But it was mania, wasn't it?
It was. I had one lady contact me going, I take on board all your charity work, but you're still a Nazi, you're just a compassionate Nazi. And that was the nicest insult I ever had. So then someone set a petition up to have me fired from my own charity. The board were basically cowards, and they went, if we don't give them Nick's head, they may come for us. So the easiest thing is let's give them Nick's head. And Nick sacked me.
And that must have been devastating.
My life fell apart.
But you also, as a result of that, were part of a national media storm.
I was. The first week I was a beaten man. I was a wreck, absolutely beaten man. It was like, what have I done to ruin my life? And then I just woke up one morning and I gave myself a talk, the same talk I've given 10,000 young men, the same talk. What you're feeling sorry for? Get up, push yourself down, your best step forward. And that's what I did. And I thought, right, spoke to this Mail on Sunday, spoke to the Free Speech Union, and I thought, I'm not having this. I may not win, but I'll tell you what, I'll be a very good second in this race. So we then launched a campaign. I launched a campaign to put more pressure on the board to say, this isn't on, this isn't right. And within 5 weeks, we forced the whole board to resign in disgrace, and I got my job back.
I'm delighted to hear that, because it was a lot of people lost their jobs during that period of time. And now, of course, the same journalists who were screaming that BLM was this great virtuous thing, they've now read the website. How about that?
Yes.
They've now caught up with where we were. So you're back to work, but here we are, cost of living crisis, a heck of a lot of people on low wages just not going to be able to pay the bills.
Yep.
It's going to be very, very hard, very, very hard. Homelessness is going to increase.
Yep.
We're facing a bit of a problem, aren't we?
We are. I've taken a step back from the charity now because funders were saying we're not going to fund the charity if Nick Buckley's involved. So I've had to take a step back. So even though I won, I still lost. Yeah. It's going to get hard. I mean, even everyday people now are struggling, the cost of living crisis, which is really a cost of lockdown crisis, basically. It's going to get hard. I don't know what the solution is.
That'd be tough.
It's going to take a proper leader, and that's what we're missing in the country.
And you've stood independently, you've stood for reform. Is politics perhaps a way that Nick Buckley might go?
It is. Not all my eggs are in that basket at the moment. But I feel the only way we're going to change the country is if we get some more voices in the places where those decisions are made. No. Because I'm tired of the same career politicians making the same choices which only benefit them. I don't mean benefit them financially, I mean benefit them in their career. It's just career politicians, and we don't seem to have anybody anymore now with a vision for the country. The only person recently with a vision for the country was Jeremy Corbyn, and I never would have voted for the man, But at least he had a different vision and said, this is where I want to take you as a nation. And we all said, no, thank you. But at least he was honest.
Very interesting point. And a final thought. You've got a book coming out this Saturday. Tell us all about it.
I have. So my first book a year ago was about what happened to me. It was all about, we need some courage in this country. And that's what the book was about. But the book that comes out on Saturday is called The Making of a Beggar. And that's the problem we have. It's everybody now is becoming a beggar off the state. We always want someone to give us something for nothing. No one's prepared to work hard, not hardly anyone's work hard. It's all about what can I get? What's in this for me? Instead of saying, what can I do to improve my family? What can I do to improve my community? If my street outside is dirty, I'll get a brush and clean it myself. I'm tired of people waiting for someone else to fix their problems, and it's getting us nowhere, and that's what we need to do if we're going to build a community back up. Personal responsibility, Nigel.
Nick Buckley, I love your positivity and your bulldog spirit. Terrific. Thank you for joining me on Talking Pints. Great pleasure to have you. A little bit of time left on tonight's show. Let's go to Barrage the Farage. Robbo asks, do you think it's feasible for Truss and Sunak to work together after the recent clashes? As our Talking Pints guest just said, they're all career politicians, and apart from a few differences on tax, they agree on virtually everything else. They agree on net zero. They'll do nothing to stop the cross-channel migrant crisis. Of course, they'll all work together. Yasmin asks me, who do you think is to blame for the delays at Dover? French intransigence. They have 14 booths, OK, on this side of the channel to check passports, and on Saturday morning there were only 6 people at those 14 stations. It's not Brexit. Operation Stack came into being in 1988. I live in Kent. I know that motorway is often a complete nightmare. Finally, Gareth asks, Nigel, when will you be going on to Truth Social? Well, tell you what I have done here. I've given Truth Social, Getter, and all those platforms a pretty fair airing. I've interviewed their chief executives. I make my own decisions which platforms I join. I'm on quite a few already. Now, I am done for the evening after the drama of that debate earlier. I'll be back with you tomorrow at 7 o'clock, but for now, I will pass you over to the capable hands of Mark Stein. Mark.
Thank you, Nigel. And you are completely right about the number of unmanned French passport booths. I saw it myself yesterday morning. So it's nothing to do with Brexit. It's to do with the fact that they're slow walking it, especially for United Kingdom passport holders. Yeah, very strange. Who would have foreseen that? They don't call them the old enemy for nothing. I'm not saying we need to go, you know, full Putin on Ukraine on them, but they are difficult in that respect. We got a great show for you. We're going to be talking about farming and the sudden decision to actually get rid of all the farmland and take it into the hands of well-known farmers like that horny-handed senatorial Bill Gates. We're going to be talking about that and a lot of other stuff, all coming up on the Mark Stein Show straight after the weather.
Hi there. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. After a relatively cloudy day in many places, there'll be an increased chance of clear spells developing overnight, and under those clear skies it will feel cool. Still 1 or 2 showers around as we end the day and go into Wednesday, but on the whole, high pressure is building in from the west, and that means winds are lighter and skies are getting clearer compared with earlier in the week. So actually, the best of the clear spells overnight will be across western England, central Scotland, parts of Wales. There will be some areas of cloud elsewhere and continued showers for the north of Scotland as well as parts of eastern England. But under clear skies, well, many places will see temperatures dip into the low double figures or even the high single figures. A more comfortable night for sleeping and a fresh start to Wednesday. Plenty of sunshine around first thing, especially for northern and western England, Wales, southern Scotland. Quite quickly, the cloud will build and